Hello guys, welcome to my channel. In this video, we will discuss Jamestown's struggle for survival. The winter of 1609 to 1610 in Jamestown was not one of mere hardship. It was a descent into the depths of human suffering. The settlers who had arrived with dreams of prosperity soon found themselves ensnared in a brutal fight for survival against the elements, dwindling supplies, and an increasingly hostile environment. This was the starving time. Jamestown, established in 1607 by the Virginia Company, was meant to be England's stronghold in the New World. The settlers, many of them gentlemen unaccustomed to labor, struggled from the outset. The swampy terrain bred disease. Fresh water was scarce, and relations with the indigenous Powhatan people were fraught with tension. Despite early struggles, Captain John Smith had managed to enforce order and establish trade with the Powhatan Confederacy. But in 1609, he was injured and forced to return to England, leaving the colony under weak leadership. Without Smith's discipline and negotiation skills, the settlers' relationship with the natives deteriorated rapidly. The new leaders of Jamestown, including George Percy, lacked Smith's authority and pragmatism. Governance faltered as factions formed within the settlement and discipline weakened. Supplies meant to sustain the colony were mismanaged, stolen, or lost. The settlers' dependency on trade with the Powhatans had left them vulnerable, and without diplomacy, tensions turned to outright hostility. As relations soured, the Powhatans, led by Chief Seneca, enacted a siege on Jamestown. No longer willing to trade, they cut off access to food and ambushed any settlers who ventured beyond the fort's walls. Trapped within their wooden palisade, the settlers found their situation growing dire. The summer's harvest had been meager, and existing food supplies dwindled rapidly. The settlers rationed what little they had, but malnutrition weakened them, making them more susceptible to disease. Dysentery, typhoid, and pneumonia spread through the colony, claiming lives before the worst of winter had even arrived. Desperation forced the settlers to consume whatever they could find. They boiled leather from their belts and shoes to make broth. They hunted rats, dogs, and cats. When even these were gone, some turned to eating grass and tree bark, their stomachs aching for sustenance. By January, death was a daily occurrence. Corpses lined the streets, their bodies too frail to bury. Entire families perished in their crude shelters, their faces frozen in the anguish of starvation. Some settlers, overcome with hunger, resorted to the most unthinkable act, cannibalism. The most infamous account involved a man who, driven mad with hunger, murdered his pregnant wife and salted her flesh for consumption. When his crime was discovered, he was executed, but he was far from the only one who had turned to such desperate measures. Reverend Richard Buck recorded these horrors in his journal, writing of the ghastly specters who once were proud Englishmen, now reduced to shadows of themselves. Some had become so weak that they lay in their huts, unable to move, waiting for death's release. Survivors whispered of bodies being exhumed in the night, of limbs disappearing from the makeshift graveyards as the living fed on the dead. By the time spring arrived in 1610, only 60 of the original 500 settlers remained. Many of those who survived were too weak to work or even stand for long periods. The colony was on the brink of collapse when, in June, a fleet led by Lord de la Warr arrived with fresh supplies and reinforcements. The newcomers were horrified by what they found. Bones gnawed clean, buildings in decay, and men and women barely clinging to life. Lord de la Warr immediately took command, instituting strict martial law. He reinforced military discipline, repaired relations with the Powhatans through a combination of diplomacy and force, and initiated new efforts to secure food. Farming was prioritized, and reliance on English resupply shipments was reduced. Though the starving time was over, its ghosts lingered in the minds of the survivors. They had witnessed and endured horrors that could never be forgotten. They rebuilt Jamestown, but the scars of the past remained, serving as a grim lesson on the perils of unpreparedness and the cost of colonial ambition. The harrowing winter of 1609 to 1610 became one of the most tragic episodes in early American history. It demonstrated the perils of unpreparedness, the brutal cost of colonization, and the resilience of those who survived. Jamestown would later flourish with the introduction of tobacco farming and the stabilization of relations with the Powhatans. But its legacy was forever scarred by the horrors of the starving time, a reminder of the human spirit's ability to endure even the darkest trials. The lessons of Jamestown's suffering influenced future colonial endeavors. More emphasis was placed on self-sufficiency, better planning, and cooperation with indigenous peoples. Though conflicts would continue, the starving time remains a cautionary tale of desperation, survival, and the limits of human endurance in the face of overwhelming adversity.